The first time he saw her, she was crouched by the trash behind Miller's saloon, a shadow in the dust, picking through scraps like a half-starved coyote. The wind had gone cold that evening, carrying the smell of mesquite smoke and something burnt pride, maybe. The sky was bruised purple, the kind that makes men think of their dead. The cowboy name was Eli Cutter had just come down from the canyon ridge after 3 days of hauling freight for the mercantile. His boots were crusted with road salt, his hands raw from rope burn, and his temper low. He only meant to get a drink before heading back to the line shack. But there she was, kneeling in rags, digging through what the town had thrown away. Her hair was tangled, sun-brittled, streaked with ash. Her face, when she looked up, was more bone than skin. Not old, no. Maybe 25, but hollowed out by something that wasn't hunger alone. Around her neck hung a faded strip of cloth, torn and stained, a symbol he recognized. The mark of shame, they called it, worn by those cast out for sin, betrayal, or witchery. The preacher's doing, most likely. That man loved a public ruin. When Eli's boot scraped the gravel, she froze. A rat darted from a tin can, and the wind caught a bit of her hair, lifting it like smoke. He said, low and even, "That's enough, ma'am. You're coming home." Her eyes flared, not in fear, but disbelief. "Home?" she whispered. "I ain't got one." Eli shifted the weight of his body, jaw tightening. "You do tonight." No one moved for a long beat. Not the woman, not Eli, not the onlookers standing in the alley's glow of lamplight, because there were always eyes in a town like Coyote Bend. Watching, waiting, ready to whisper. Behind the glass of the saloon, men pretended not to see. Even the dog by the water trough gave a low, uneasy growl, as if sensing something forbidden in the air. Then, from the porch, a boy's voice broke the silence. "Mr. Cutter," he called, hesitant. "That there's the witch, ain't she?" The word witch cracked the air like a whip. The woman flinched, clutching her cloth tighter. Her fingers were cracked, blood at the nails. Eli didn't look at the boy. His voice came slow, steady as thunder rolling down a canyon. "Son, only cowards use names for things they don't understand." He took the woman's arm gently, but firm enough to tell her it wasn't a question, and led her toward the horse rail. The onlookers parted like dry grass in wind. No one spoke, but the silence had weight, the kind that sticks to your ribs. When Eli lifted her up onto his horse, she trembled, not from fear, he realized, but from cold. He handed her his coat without a word. As he mounted, she whispered, "They burned my house." He said, "Then we'll build another." And with that, the two rode out of Coyote Bend, beneath a sky heavy with ash and moonlight. Behind them, Boy still stood by the porch, staring after the rider and the marked woman. In the morning, his mother would tell him not to speak of it again, but he would. He would tell it years later, by a campfire, the night the cowboy took the witch home. By the time the stars had burned through the clouds, they'd reached the river crossing, a place where the land bent low and the cottonwoods whispered over black water. Eli reined in his horse, letting the animal drink. The woman hadn't spoken since they left town. She just stared at the current, as though it might carry her somewhere better if she let it. Her hands were still shaking. When the moonlight hit her face, Eli saw the truth of it, the bruises fading yellow under her jaw, the rope burn circling her wrists. Someone hadn't just shamed her. They'd owned her pain. He climbed down, unsaddled his horse, with slow, deliberate care, giving her space. The night smelled of cold iron and river mud. When he finally spoke, his voice was gravel low. "Name's Eli Cutter. I run cattle on the far side of the ridge. Used to be more men than cows. Not anymore." She didn't answer, just sat there, arms around herself, watching the reflection of fireflies drift over the river like lost souls. He tossed her his canteen. "Drink." Then tell me what the hell happened. Her fingers brushed the metal, but she didn't raise it. Ain't much to tell. Try me. They said I called down sickness, said the preacher's daughter took ill after I cleaned her house, and it must have been my doing. Eli snorted softly. And they figured starvation was better medicine. They needed someone to blame, she murmured. Someone easy. She looked at him then, truly looked as though testing if this weathered man might spit the same judgment the town had. But his eyes were tired, not cruel. There was no righteousness in him, only a kind of worn-out decency that came from losing more than he cared to count. He sat on the ground, took out his pipe, and said, "What's your name, miss?" "June," she said finally. "June Whitaker." "That name's worth more than how they said it." She gave a small, bitter laugh. "Ain't worth much when folks say it with stones in their hands." Eli didn't reply. With effort said, end quote, "The prison tree, the snot worth more than hap." He just reached into his saddlebag and drew out something wrapped in burlap, the shape of a small wooden box. "Found this behind Miller's saloon last week. Figured it'd go to waste." He unwrapped it to reveal a tin of salve, a clean rag, and a biscuit. "Ain't much of a doctor, but it'll help with the burns." For a long while, June didn't move. Then, wordless, she held out her wrists. He dabbed at them carefully, the way a man handles a wounded foal. Every touch made her flinch, though she tried to hide it. "Who tied the rope?" he asked quietly. She hesitated. "The preacher's boy. Said it'd save my soul." Eli's jaw worked like he was grinding stone between his teeth. Men like that think salvation's a leash. He wrapped the cloth gently around her wrists, his fingers steady, his voice low. "Ain't nobody's right to brand another human being." When she finally looked up, her eyes were rimmed red. "Why are you helping me?" He shrugged, half turning toward the fire. "Maybe I'm tired of riding past things that ought not be left behind." They sat in silence after that. The fire cracked softly, spitting sparks into the dark. Somewhere in the trees, a coyote called, its cry sharp and lonely. Eli reached into his saddlebag again and tossed something small into the flames, a scrap of cloth, her cloth, the mark she'd worn around her neck. It curled, caught, and burned. June gasped, half rising. "You shouldn't have done that." He looked at her, eyes hard and kind at once. "Then they can hang a new one. You're done carrying their shame." The wind shifted. The smoke rose straight, then bent east toward town. For a moment, the burning rag glowed like a signal against the night, a message, silent but clear. He poked at the fire with a stick. "You can come with me till the frost breaks. Got a cabin that needs mending and land that don't talk back." June nodded slowly, still staring at the flames. "And after?" "After, you can decide what kind of story you want to tell." She didn't answer, but in her silence was something new. Not quite hope, but the faint crack of it. Eli turned his hat brim low and let her be. Behind them, the embers hissed, swallowing the last of the cloth. And far off, downriver, a wolf howled as if it had seen a ghost freed. The trail to Eli's ranch wound through a dry basin where even the wind seemed tired of moving. 3 days' ride from town, and June hadn't said more than a dozen words. Eli didn't press her. Some wounds bleed quieter when left alone. When they reached the ridge, dawn was barely crawling. Over the horizon, the cabin stood lonely against a field of brittle sage, one shutter hanging by a single hinge, the roof sagging like a weary back. But smoke rose from the chimney, proof of stubbornness, if not life. June slid down from the horse and stood a long moment, arms folded. "This your home?" Eli nodded. "What's left of it. Looks like it's been fighting the wind a while." He half smiled. "Wind wins most days. I just make it work for its victory." Inside, the air smelled of cedar and tobacco. There was one table, one chair, one narrow bed, and a stove that hissed when he fed it wood. "Take the bed," he said simply. "I'll sleep by the fire." She shook her head. I can take the floor. You've had enough of the ground, June. He said it in a way that left no room for pride, only peace. Over the next few days, the silence of the ridge wrapped around them like a thick quilt, rough but warm. June helped where she could, fetching water, cleaning the stove, patching torn shirts. Sometimes she hummed under her breath, the faintest thread of melody. When Eli asked what tune it was, she just said, "Something my mama used to hum when we were waiting for storms to pass." At night, she woke screaming, once dream of fire, rope, and faces turned away. Eli didn't speak, didn't touch her. He just tossed another log on the fire and waited till her breathing slowed. When morning came, neither mentioned it. But word travels faster than mercy in a town like Coyote Bend. By the end of the week, riders started passing the Ridge Road more often. Men from town mail carriers, ranch hands, curious souls pretending to look for strays. They'd pause by the fence line, spit tobacco, and ride off slow. One morning, June found a bundle tossed by the gate, a Bible split in half, pages torn, a single word scrawled on the cover in ash, which she stood staring at it until her vision blurred. Eli came up behind her, silent. "Guess they miss you," he said, voice dry as the dust. June's jaw clenched. "They want me scared." He nodded toward the horizon. "Then don't give them the gift." That night, Eli sat at the table with his pipe, staring at nothing. June was mending an old shirt, her fingers raw, but steady. After a long silence, she asked softly, "You ever been on the wrong side of a crowd, Eli?" He took a slow drag. "Once." "What'd they call you?" "Deserter." The word hung heavy between them. He exhaled smoke that curled like memory. "War took more out of me than I had to give. Left a post without orders. Came back to bury a wife I never got to save." He looked at her, eyes reflecting firelight. "Crowd don't care about your reason. They just want someone to point at so they don't have to look at themselves." June set down the needle, her face softening. "Guess that makes us both the town's sin." "Maybe," he said, "but sin's got hands. Enough to build again." For a while, only the wind spoke, rattling the shutters. Then June said, "They branded me a witch because the preacher's daughter died of fever. Truth is, she was carrying his child." Eli's eyes snapped up. "He blamed me to hide his own dirt," she whispered. "Told the town I cursed her womb. Folks believed it. Easier that way." Eli's hand tightened around his pipe till the stem cracked. He didn't speak for a long time. Finally, "You still got proof?" She reached into her apron and pulled out a folded note, fragile as moth wings. "Her letter. She gave it to me the day before she took sick. The handwriting was faint but clear. He says God forgives. I just wish he'd let me rest." Eli folded the letter back slow. "Keep it safe. That paper's the truth the town ain't ready for." Outside, thunder rolled far off but coming. June stared at the sky, at the thin silver of lightning above the ridge. What happens? When they come again? Eli rose, moving to the door. Then they'll find a witch with a roof, and a man too damn tired to let her burn. That night, when the rain finally came, it came hard drumming on the roof, washing the dust from the air. June stood at the doorway, letting the water hit her hands. Her scars glistened like silver threads. She whispered, almost to herself, "Maybe it's time shame got clean too." The storm had passed, but the land still smelled of rain and gun oil. The ridge was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that waits. Eli was mending a fence post when he heard the distant rhythm of hooves. Not one rider, many. The sound carried across the valley like a drumbeat of judgment. He didn't look up right away. He just tied the wire tight, wiped his brow, and said softly, "June, get inside." She was standing by the porch, hands buried in her apron. Her face was pale, but her eyes, those gray, steady eyes, didn't flinch. "They're coming, ain't they?" "They are," he said. "Then I ain't hiding." He wanted to argue, But something in her voice, quiet, final, stopped him. She'd hidden enough for one lifetime. By the time the riders appeared over the ridge, the sun had just crested, turning the wet earth gold. 6 men, 2 carried rifles slung across their backs. One, the preacher himself, rode at the center, black coat flapping like a vulture's wing. They stopped a few yards from the gate. Eli stood with his hands loose at his sides, the morning light cutting across his jaw. June was behind him, but close enough that her breath brushed his shoulder. "Eli Cutter," the preacher called, voice oily and loud. "You're harboring a condemned woman. You know what that means." Eli didn't move. "I know what condemned means when it comes from your mouth, Reverend." A ripple went through the men. Uncertain laughter. The preacher's horse pawed at the mud. "This ain't your fight, Cutter. She brought sickness, sin, and death upon this town." June stepped forward then. Just one step, but it was enough to silence the wind. "Your daughter," she said, voice steady, "died carrying your shame, not mine." The preacher's face drained white. His fingers twitched on the reins. "You lie." June reached into her apron and held up the folded letter. Her words, not mine. Eli watched the preacher's mouth tighten, not with guilt, but fury. He saw it then, the fear of a man whose lies had grown too loud to bury.
"She bewitched my child," the preacher shouted. "You all saw her."
"The fever started after she worked in my house." A murmur rippled through the riders, doubt sliding in like a snake between boots. Eli's voice came low. "Fever don't come from sin, Reverend. Comes from rot, the kind that festers in a man who can't face his own damn mirror." The preacher yanked his pistol from the holster. "You'd point your gun at God's word, Cutter?" Eli didn't blink. "No, just at the liar speaking it." The hammer clicked back. The riders froze. Somewhere, a crow called one sharp cry that cracked the tension. Then came the smallest voice. "Don't shoot her." A boy, the same boy from the saloon, no older than 12, had followed the men, clutching a stray dog to his chest. His voice trembled, but he said it again, louder this time. "Don't shoot her. You told us God forgives." The preacher turned, face twisting, and in that instant, the balance shifted. The riders' men who'd come to witness another burning couldn't look the boy in the eye. Shame, real and human, spread through them like dawn light on frost. Eli saw his chance. Everything with Krivik down, 17 down, 2 downs captaminos. So widers of the priest, downs pet account. Aider, and a Krivik downs count. And a lie. He spoke quietly, so they had to lean in to hear. "Go home, boys. Take your preacher with you before he damns you all for good." No one moved for several heartbeats. Then the oldest rider, gray-bearded and tired, spat into the mud. "Reckon we've had enough damnations for one lifetime." He turned his horse. The others followed, slow, uncertain, but moving. The preacher sat frozen, shaking with fury, until the last of his congregation was gone. Eli took a step forward, steady as a storm breaking. "You'll leave this ridge now, Reverend." "You think this is over?" the preacher hissed. Eli's gaze never wavered. "For you, it's only startin'." The preacher's hand trembled as he lowered his pistol, turned his horse, and rode away alone. For a long time after the sound of hooves faded, June didn't speak. The letter was still in her hand, damp with rain and sweat. Then, slowly, she tore it in half. Eli blinked. "That letter could have cleared your name." June's voice was soft, but certain. "A name don't need clearing when the truth's already breathing." She let the pieces drift into the wet soil. The dog barked once sharp, almost joyful, and for the first time, since the night behind Miller's saloon, June smiled. Not wide, not easy, but real. Weeks passed. The ridge turned green again after the rains, and wildflowers grew in places that had known only dust. The cabin roof was mended, the fence line strong. Life came back slow. like something afraid to trust its own return. June rose with the sun now. She swept the porch, fed the chickens, kept the kettle singing. Sometimes she'd walk down to the river and let her hands trail through the current, where once they'd been bound. Her scars had faded to pale threads, but she never covered them. They were proof, not shame. Eli watched from the field one morning as she knelt in the soil behind the cabin. She was planting something, a circle of small stones marking a patch of turned earth. He walked up, wiping his brow. "What you got there?" June smiled faintly. "Lavender. Grows slow, but once it takes, it don't die easy." He crouched beside her, hands resting on his knees. "That meant something to you?" She pressed a seed into the dirt. "Mama said it keeps away spirits, the kind that whisper you're not worth saving." Eli looked at her then, really looked. The girl he'd found in the trash was gone. The woman before him was something else, tempered, like metal forged through fire. A hawk circled high above, silent. In the distance, smoke rose from town. Not the black kind of burning, but cooking fires, mourning life. Word had spread. He knew. The preacher had left Coyote Bend 2 weeks ago. No sermon. No farewell. Just gone. Some said he'd taken the church's silver and vanished at night. Others said he'd gone mad in the desert, talking to ghosts that wouldn't forgive him. Either way, his name wasn't spoken much anymore. Eli handed June a canteen. "Town's quieter now. You could go back if you wanted." She paused, dirt under her nails, eyes on the horizon. "Ain't nothing for me there," he nodded. "Then stay here, work the land. It'll give back what it can." She looked toward the porch, where his coat still hung, the same one he'd given her that night. Inside its pocket was the burned scrap of cloth she thought he'd thrown away. She'd found it while washing clothes, half ash, half thread, but still holding shape. He hadn't burned all of it. Not quite. She took it out now, unfolded what was left, and pressed it into the soil beside the lavender. "Why bury that?" Eli asked quietly. She smiled, a weary, earned thing. "Because I ain't ashamed no more. Let it feed something better." The wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of rain and crushed sage. For a long time, neither spoke. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It had roots. That night, they sat by the fire, the flames painting the walls gold. Eli poured 2 cups of coffee and passed one to her. "To second chances," he said. June tilted her cup, eyes glinting in the firelight. "To the ones who stop when they don't have to." He smiled at that, slow and quiet. Outside, the night spread wide, full of stars and the low hum of crickets. A coyote's call drifted from far down the valley, long and mournful, then fading into peace. June leaned back against the wall, the warmth of the fire catching her hair. "Think they'll tell it?" she asked. Eli glanced at her. "What's that?" "Our story. The witch and the cowboy." He gave a small, almost amused snort. "Maybe, but stories change. Folks remember what they can live with." She looked toward the garden, the soil dark under moonlight, the lavender faintly visible, the buried cloth beneath it. "Then I hope they remember this much," she whispered, "that a woman can be burned and still grow roots." Eli's gaze lingered on her, then the horizon beyond. "And that a man can find redemption just by stopping long enough to listen." The fire cracked. The wind shifted. Somewhere in the dark, the river kept moving, same as it always had, carrying what was lost, what was forgiven, and what remained. When dawn came, the first light touched the patch of earth behind the cabin. Tiny shoots had broken through the soil, fragile, defiant, alive. And for anyone who ever rode past that ridge in the years that followed, they'd see it. A small garden blooming where the condemned once stood, with a single stone at its center. Carved into it, rough but sure, were 4 words. She stayed. So did mercy. Campfire's quiet now. The embers glow low. And maybe somewhere out there, in another dry town with another preacher's voice, someone remembers her, the woman who wasn't burned after all. Because sometimes, the West didn't need saving. It just needed one man to stop and one woman to refuse to bow. If this story touched you, the courage, the silence, the survival, then saddle up with us for more forgotten Wild West tales of mercy and grit. Subscribe now and ride along for the next campfire story that still echoes in the dust.